Our societies have preserved and often placed great importance on our ability to alter our consciousness through chemical means. What does this say about us as a species? Did nature make a mistake? Or were we plied with the means and knowledge of intoxication for some higher purpose? For a really long time, humans have been making our own inebriating concoctions. We have built our stills across the world, on mountainsides, in monasteries, in basements, down alleyways. The Incan Empire spent much time producing and distributing the corn-based wine, chicha, a drink still made and consumed widely in Peru. The ancient Sumerians used colossal amounts of grain in their beer production. Many early societies saw intoxication as a means of gaining a deeper connection to the spiritual realm. Alcohol was combined with music and dance in a ritualistic way to bring about ecstatic, trance-like states. Ecstasy comes from the Greek ekstasis, meaning standing outside oneself. Dionysus was no stranger to the raptures of wine and ceremony. The ancient Egyptians celebrated the festival of drunkenness, commemorating the salvation of humankind when the goddess Hathor was tricked into getting drunk on red-dyed beer instead of human blood. In our stories of civilization, the communal drunken state was almost seen as something sacred. Our Neolithic ancestors even took to burying their dead with jars of booze, as found in the Jiahu tomb of central China. Socialized drinking may have played a key role in our evolution into big-brained social primates. Drinking with our community brings down our walls and acts like a glue of trust and conviviality. Coming together in altered states gave us a sense of being part of something bigger than ourselves. There are varied theories on how we may have first discovered the effects of alcohol, from involuntarily ingesting ethanol by munching on rotten fruit, to intentionally directing the fermentation of excess foods like grain or rice. Rather than fading into the margins as some dangerous extravagance might, our thirst for intoxication has grown exponentially down through the centuries. Irish mythology holds the belief of an invisible supernatural world living within the human world. It is thought to exist under the earth, the hills, lakes, rivers, and sea. In order to reach this place, a character must go on a kind of spiritual or heroic journey, often crossing a great body of water or passing through a thick celestial fog before being able to properly interact with this world. Here they can convene with the gods and goddesses. It is believed that some of these journeys are achieved through the process of sacred intoxication, that the fog could be a metaphor for the blurred vision reached after imbibing a drink like mead or wine. Texts and archaeology tend to prove that sacred intoxication was generally reserved to the elite, the kings, the hero warriors, and more particularly the priests, on account of being the divine representatives of the gods on earth, or the intermediary between human beings and supernatural forces. The goddess Maeve, or Maeve, Queen of Connaught, is one of the more influential and remembered female figures in the Ulster cycle of this mythology. Commonly, she is identified as the goddess of war and love, but some etymologists have suggested that her name comes from the Celtic word Medua. The meaning of her name has thus been interpreted as Mead Woman, or she who intoxicates, or even the intoxicating one. This is thought to reflect her role as sovereignty goddess. In ancient and medieval Ireland, the drinking of mead was a key part of a king's inauguration ceremony. In myth, a supernatural woman representing the sovereignty of the land chooses a king by offering him an alcoholic drink, thus bestowing power and ascendancy upon him. In Irish mythical lore, Maeve is never seen to be inebriated herself, but is shown as someone who provides intoxicating drinks to others, especially men, kings and warriors before battle. Mead, a drink made from the fermentation of honey, has been referred to as the ambrosia of the Celts. It's been likened to the Indian fermented drink, soma, made from the honey drawn from a plant known as ray of light. Brahmins would drink soma to reach ecstatic states and believed this divine beverage would bestow eternity of the soul. Maeve uses the intoxicating qualities of mead to convince warriors, such as her lover Fergus, to go into battle with the renowned hero Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cullen. The drink acts like an elixir to cure doubt or lack of courage when engaging in great battles that would serve to change the course of history in the ancient kingdoms. It is a ritualistic blessing of sorts and seen as a sacred covenant. This kind of mythology is an important part of the makeup of Irish culture. Pre-Christian Ireland was a place of paganistic beliefs and practices, where the spiritual, mythological world of the gods was understood to be linked closely to the lives of everyday people. Superstition was widespread. In early Celtic art, the faces of deities are represented with protruding, hallucinating, or hypnotizing eyes. We see these faces on fibulas and torques, sacred objects that symbolized magical protection. They are portrayed with animal elements, as if in a state of mutation, furthered by the absorption of visionary substances. Ireland is a place steeped in lore and myth, where intoxication plays a central role in the tales of the ancestors. An early version of the home brew was what the Irish called poitin, an elixir of mythical proportions that could send you blind or into a state of transcendent drunkenness or even cure a common sickness. Poitin's legacy stretches far back and is a precursor to whiskey that would later be refined in Scotland. Irish monks in the 6th century are known to be the first to brew this potent liquid. It is said they used poitin for medicinal purposes only, to treat muscle pain, to disinfect wounds, to cure illnesses like smallpox or colic. But the monk knew how to alter consciousness through prayer, through fasting, so it's not unreasonable to imagine them discovering the mind-bending qualities of their creation and attributing an intense drunken reverie to some kind of metaphysical or religious experience. Distillation moved out of the monastery and into the hands of rural moonshiners, and poitin soon became a recreational drink rather than a medicinal potion. Ireland was a colonised country, a blueprint of sorts for the future expansions of the British Empire across the globe. The Empire banned the drink's production in 1661 after King Charles II found it near impossible to tax. It would remain illegal until 1997. Poitin was the drink of the people, made by the people in crude but effective stills. Stills were moved from cottage to barn and then to small shacks in the hills and mountains. Some set up on islands in the middle of lakes for secrecy. Driven underground, distillation was unregulated and could harvest brews up to 90% proof. Drinkers would report hallucinations, wild dreams, long spaces of time and memory lost. There are stories of overconsumption leading to catatonic states that could resemble death, from which the drinker would hopefully recover in anything from a few hours to a couple of days. The brewing of poitin was in itself an act of resistance. When people's lives are subjugated, they will often turn to anything to alleviate the drudgery, to dull the pain for a while. From its inception, British rule was a systematic, oppressive project, intent on breaking the Irish people's will. One method of resistance was to preserve the cultural practices, the language, the music. A colonising force can take the land, can brutalise and politically disenfranchise the people, but if they manage to stamp out the culture, they crush the heart, they strangle the spirit, they win completely. Poitin has been lionised in song and story more than once.
Like your quacks and newspaper, they cut in their capers about curing the vapours, the scratcher, the gout, with their powders and potions, their salves and lotions, their fun and their notions, their mighty put on. Would you know the true physic to bother pathetic and pitch to the dibble, cram colic and spleen? You'll find it, I think, if you take a big drink with your mouth to the brink of a glass of poitin.
The Irish have long been characterised and stereotyped as prolific drinkers, as a people with a unique makeup prone to alcoholism, as if their DNA carries some kind of defective gene. But the significance of inebriation in their story could just be another link in the historical chain of society's reliance on strong beverages to form community, to bless rituals, and create a bulwark against the tribulations of being alive. Irish independence from the British Empire came, for the most part, in 1922, though it was not a victory for freedom in everyone's eyes. A 2-year civil war broke out between those in favour and those against the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which established all but 6 counties in the north of the country as the Irish Free State. This declaration of independence did mark a symbolic sea change, however. After 7 centuries of British conquest and rule over the country, Ireland now had a glimpse at its own sovereignty once again. Much had been lost or damaged during that time. Many lives, ownership of land, cultural identity, and for a majority of people, the native tongue, Gaelic. The distillation of poitin survived, and had turned into an illegal but strong cottage industry. There was money in poitin, and indeed there were some people who relied upon the brewing and selling of it in order to make a decent living. In the decades leading up to its eventual legalisation, there were countless stories and news reports about the raiding of poitin stills across the country. The Irish police force, the Gardaí, would hit locations at times when they thought they could catch the person on sight, with the evidence all around them. This became a kind of cat and mouse game, seeing moonshiners evading capture by a hair's breadth, abandoning their still and running off into the surrounding countryside as the police seized upon their sight and proceeded to destroy their equipment. 1978 saw the release of the film Poitin, produced and directed by Irish filmmaker Bob Quinn. The story and plot is simplistic but gives keen insight into the life of a poitin distiller in rural Ireland. The entire film was shot on location in Connemara, County Galway. It is dark and holds a strange, foreboding atmosphere throughout, presenting a picture of an older man who lives with his daughter beside a lake, who brews poitin and sells to 2 local hawkers. The hawkers are under the constant watchful eyes of the police as they try to distribute the drink in their environs. But they are greedy and also partial to a drop themselves. The film presents a much grittier, less polished picture of Ireland than what had previously come out of Hollywood. It is not The Quiet Man. It is not Darby O'Gill. It is far from depictions of luscious green rolling hills and quaint dances at the crossroads. There is a raw desperation hanging over the characters, a bleakness all around them, an overwhelming feeling of a people bereft of purpose. Poitin was originally released without a musical score. Between long gaps of dialogue, we hear only the sounds of the landscape of Connemara. It was later re-released with a very minimal score and contained the Sean-Oath song Éireann an Fhoitín, which is heard far off in the distance in certain scenes, and then in full at the end. Irish writers recognised the role of alcohol in a post-colonial society as both curse and blessing. James Joyce's Dubliners is littered with references to alcohol dependence, while the Circe episode in Ulysses explores the hallucinatory effects of absinthe on the character Stephen Daedalus. The young poet experiences visions while highly intoxicated in the bowels of Bella Cohn's brothel. He sees himself as a Roman Catholic cardinal wearing a rosary made out of corks. When he stares drunkenly into a mirror, an image of an antlered William Shakespeare appears beside him. Finally, he sees his dead mother, who pleads with him to repent, before morphing into a green crab with malignant red eyes. Joyce's use of absinthe as a symbol in Ulysses is intrinsically connected to Stephen Daedalus's role as a bohemian artist who rejects bourgeois notions of identity. Absinthe was the drink of choice for artistic predecessors like Rimbaud and Verlaine, a drink symbolic of the early 19th century counterculture, which had become popularised in the working-class cafes of Paris. Joyce had his own habits. He was known to be a binge drinker and claimed that a certain level of intoxication made for an excellent writing aid. He believed that liquor heightened feelings and admitted that he could not write as well without it. Also tied to drinking were his depictions of nationalist fervour in his literary work, which seemed to always be accompanied by alcohol consumption, self-pity, and reminiscences of the greater times. Joyce was keenly aware of a kind of paralysis that could overcome the psyche of a colonised people, leading them to alcoholism and misty-eyed nostalgia, instead of questioning and trying to change their predicament. For Joyce, the partaking of alcohol was ideally to stimulate the creative mind, not hinder it. The celebrated playwright and novelist John B. Keane from County Kerry was interviewed in the 1980s and spoke with great affection about his lifelong love for drinking. No man was ever born into this world with such a passionate love of liquor as myself. It isn't just that I love liquor for the taste of it. I love the plop of whiskey into a glass. I love to listen to it. I love to see the cream on a pint. I love the first powerful, violent impact of a glass of whiskey when I throw it back in me and when it hits the mark below. Keane's description is full of sensory delight, the sounds, the sights, the feeling. The partaking of a drink is ceremonious and should be treated as such. It's almost like whiskey resembles a mistress and she is seducing him. Keane owned and ran a pub in the town of Listowel with his wife Mary. After closing hours, he would begin drinking pints of stout. before retiring to a room above the pub to write into the early hours. It was here he conceived many of his critically acclaimed works, the environs of the pub providing him with much inspiration. Keane viewed the pub as a unique place of solace for his customers. In another interview, he describes the most contemplative consumer of drink as a shelf inspector, a person who could sit for hours marvelling at the coloured bottles behind the bar, a man who is content to sit enraptured by the amber of whiskey, the green of creme de menthe, the blood red of raspberry, the berylline green of lime, the unique yellow of advocate, every colour of the rainbow all under his inspection. He can sit there all day, happily, fueling his imagination from time to time with little drops of paddy. It's as if Keane is describing the majesty of a stained glass window, the pub becoming a second church, a place of near spiritual significance. A saying goes, a man takes a drink, the drink takes a drink, the drink takes the man. Beyond the cartoonish depictions of the Irish as perpetual drunken wastrels, there's a deeper and darker truth to the destructive force of alcohol in a society such as Ireland's. The ghosts of Ireland's colonial past loom large in the public psyche to this day. Centuries of occupation on a population of people can produce a particular inferiority complex, a hidden self-loathing and vulnerability to use substances as remission for inner turmoil. Throughout the 20th century, the country's literary output went through a number of revivals and golden ages, with works from a host of exceptional writers who were recognised globally as unique and often, like Joyce, groundbreaking talents. The free and easy taking of alcohol among Ireland's creatives was ever present. Drinking was a cultural norm, and drinking profusely was almost a given in artistic circles. Brendanbehan, writer of plays The Quare Fellow and The Hostage, and autobiographical novel The Borstal Boy, came into prominence in the 1950s. Born into a staunchly Republican family, by the age of 16, Behan had joined the Irish Republican Army and been imprisoned in England after he was arrested on a misguided solo bombing mission in Liverpool. Behan would later become a literary star celebrated in America as an important new Irish voice. But sadly, his reputation as a quarrelsome alcoholic often eclipses his literary achievement. Behan himself characterised himself as a drinker with a writing problem, and would regularly make public appearances in a state of inebriation. After his success and recognition as a writer, the Behan presented to the world was often caught up in the image of being the libertine, the heroic drunk who freewheeled through life with a contempt for anything he deemed as conformity. As he spiraled deeper into his addiction, he would almost become a sad caricature, wheeled out for entertainment and laughs, while his writing took a back seat. Behind this mask, however, was a shy person who, without the aid of drink, was soft-spoken and introspective, using alcohol as a remedy to his social awkwardness. An infamous interview for BBC's Panorama in 1956 shows him at one of his lowest points. He is bedraggled, shoeless, and incoherent, slurring his way through a stream of questions by Malcolm Muggeridge. At the end of the ordeal, Behan was escorted from the studio in a defeated state as the police arrived. Alcohol and creativity have been bedfellows in the world of artistic pursuit for a long time. For a writer like Behan, it went beyond the lubrication of the mind to think laterally or take risks in his work. it became the impediment to his creative output. As Behan's brain got wetter, his writing dried up. It created a cycle of despair. The fruits of his efforts to return to his work were becoming progressively mediocre in comparison to his past triumphs. Crestfallen, he would turn back to heavy drinking to nurse his wounded pride. He would never return to previous form and would die at the age of 41 from diabetes and alcohol-related problems. In Irish culture, one of the epicenters of communal activity has historically revolved around music, and music in Ireland was often paired with alcohol. Before the advent of television and radio, many Irish would form their entertainment around get-togethers, where people from the surrounding community would visit what was known as a rambling house, bearing food and drink and instruments. The rambling houses of Ireland were mainly found in small rural towns and were central in the forming of bonds and community in parts of the country where isolation was widespread. They were especially important during the winter months, when dark evenings were long and cold, and spending many hours indoors after the day's work was necessary. Plied with alcohol, a night session would serve as a cradle of sorts for camaraderie, for discussion, for the releasing of emotions through music and singing. There was dancing, storytelling, traditional tunes and ballads. The owner of the house would stock up on porter or spirits. For its many negative effects, alcohol, when taken in this manner, had a functional purpose. It harked back to something more ancient. Music is known to alter the state of the listener, and when combined with alcohol, people can enter a space free of their daily worries for a while. It was a salve to living in the hard conditions of the time. In between the dancing and energetic fiddle tunes, the traditional ballad, sang unaccompanied, could offer a time of reflection, of melancholy, or sometimes comic relief. Songs were often narrative in form, reciting tales of love, of adventure, of resistance. In his self-penned song Ban on Lana, or The Woman with the Beer, Joe Heaney, the Irish traditional singer, tells a story of a young man who, in the opening verse, requests the landlady of an alehouse to "Get me a drop of whiskey or a quart of your own ale." Then states, "We'll be drinking until the morning, and when the mistress leaves, I'll have the prettiest girl." The protagonist of the song goes on to lament the loss of the woman he truly desires. He wanders the countryside searching for her. In drunken escapades, he beds other women. He muses on his own death. Nothing can replace his lost love. In the final verse, he meets with a musician who has a jug of moonshine. "We got so drunk we could move neither hand nor foot," he says. Drinking himself into a stupor, the young man knows there will be a deeper heartache in the morning and a reckoning to pay, and yet he does so, lost in his cavalier quest for romance. Similar to the literary world, the presence of alcohol has been a staple in Irish music for generations. Songs of unrequited love see characters turning to drink in an effort to soothe their state of loss and rejection. Romantic encounters are bolstered by beer and spirits. Alcohol is used in seeing off the dead, in all manner of conquests, fights, and fantastical tales. The Wild Rover is possibly one of the more well-known songs to have been kicked around Ireland for many years. Its precise origin has been contested, as the song has travelled widely and gone through numerous permutations depending on who is singing it and where. A common occurrence in folk and traditional songs sees them adapting to their geographical surroundings and time of appearance. Though it's almost certain the song was not first conceived in Ireland, one of the most well-known and lasting versions was recorded by the Irish band The Dubliners in 1963. The Wild Rover is commonly wheeled out as a celebratory knees-up drinking song, but taking a closer look at the lyrics reveals something quite different. I've been a wild rover for many's the year, and I've spent all me money on whiskey and beer. But now I'm returning with gold in great store, and I never will play the wild rover no more. It seems in fact to be a song of temperance, warning of the pitfalls of regular drinking. The protagonist regrets their frivolous lifestyle. The lyrics are of course open to interpretation, and perhaps the song morphed from a lament to something more rebellious because of this fact. Should the listener trust that the protagonist truly means to give up their roving, freewheeling ways and go home to settle back into a more conservative lifestyle? Or are we just hearing the fleeting feelings of regret that can come after nights of overconsumption? Behind the song's immediate message, the lyrics describe a certain way of being that for some reason has resonated within Irish music and with audiences for many years. The ritual of the Irish wake has waned over the years, but traditionally it was an organised period of mourning that could last for several days. The wake would take place in the house of the deceased, where the body was laid out in an open coffin. Extended family, friends and people from the community would convene at the house to partake in a ceremonial send-off for the person who had died. Rather than being a sombre affair, the wake was designed as a sort of celebratory ritual. Alcohol was often plentiful, as was music, storytelling and poetry. Some believed that the early versions of the wake were tied to paganistic Celtic influences, which gradually meshed with Catholic funeral services as Christianity rose in Ireland. The Celts believed in life after death and thought that when a person died, they were simply moving on to a better life. Death was a new beginning and therefore should be treated as a cause for celebration and festivities. Similarly to the Draiocht tomb, great drinking vessels were found scattered at Celtic grave sites, such as the V site in northern Burgundy, France. The Celtic tribes were nomadic people, and their arrival on Irish shores is estimated at around 2,500 years ago. Their legacy remains woven into the fabric of Ireland's cultural tapestry. The Irish wake saw merrymaking as an important part of the initial grieving process. By lowering the walls of politeness, it was believed the mourners could be more open with their raw emotions. Toasting the deceased was customary, and people would hold vigil over the coffin for a number of days, some taking measures of whiskey, as goodbyes were said and the soul of the deceased was ushered into the next world, surrounded by their loved ones. Adding to the ritualistic nature of the early Irish wake was the inclusion of what were known as ban cuinche, or keening women. This could be a single person or a group of women whose job was to wail over the body of the deceased in a public expression of sorrow. Keening could be viewed as another musical aspect in the ceremonial send-off of a loved one, though its purpose was not one of entertainment. Rather, the keening woman would use her voice to carry the mourners through this early stage of grief and offer some kind of communal catharsis. The ban cuinche would hold a liminal space between the living and the world of the dead. Keening is also linked to Celtic practices of guiding the soul into the next world, and the particular sound of the keening female voice was thought to be protective and offer a safe passage. It seems the fundamental objective of the wake was to create a womb-like space where people would feel comfortable with expressions of both joy and sorrow, that these emotions can coexist, that sadness is natural, that life should be celebrated and loss commemorated. Drinking was permitted and often encouraged as a way to deal with the shock of grief and to bond with the other mourners. By the mid-19th century, a temperance movement had emerged in Ireland and gained strong support from the Catholic Church. They urged their communities to cut out their drinking ways and turn more of their attentions to attending Mass and singing to their religious lives. They preached that spirituality was a process of sacrifice, prescribing increasingly austere ways of living to the congregations. The taking of alcohol was not the behaviour of God-fearing people. Purity of spirit demanded a clear-headedness and self-control. Priests also leaned into the growing nationalistic sentiment in the country, spreading the idea that drunkenness and loose morals were in fact a symptom of British colonialism. They went as far to suggest that the abundance of alcohol in the country was a plot to quash any dissidence to British rule, that the British overseer would only be too happy to see Irish troublemakers drink themselves into bad health and poverty. The CTAU, or Catholic Total Abstinence Union, became prominent in the 19th and early 20th century, urging people to sign a pledge of complete sobriety. It was a very organised network that set up regular meetings, lectures and educational campaigns across the country, informing people of alcohol's dangers to health and the benefits of leaving it behind. For a time, the CTAU became quite influential and effective in its goals, but it did not move with the times and people's shifting attitudes towards abstinence. Turning the Irish population away from its cultures of drinking and merrymaking proved extremely difficult, and over time the grip of Catholicism over the people of Ireland began to loosen. Newer generations placed less and less value on the moralistic teachings of the Church, and the country gradually became more secularised. The Catholic Church suffered some of its most devastating blows when stories began to emerge about deep hypocrisies and corruption within its own ranks. Child abuse scandals and investigations into the brutality of church-run organisations like the Magdalene Laundries ripped apart the previous image of the Church as its people's keeper. The abuses were too horrific, and the attempts of the Church to cover over its crimes saw Mass attendance numbers plummet over time. The betrayal was so deep and painful that to this day the Catholic Church has never really regained the same foothold it once had in Ireland. There is no question that alcohol consumption has its dark side, and this side can get very, very dark. Abuses can lead to violence, fatal accidents, extreme health risks, depression, madness, death. And Ireland has never been found lacking in these problems due to its ongoing liberal attitude to intoxicating drinks. But alcohol usage is so deeply entwined within the cultural makeup of the country that it is difficult to imagine a dry, completely sober Ireland. Drinking together in public still provides people with a vital social connectivity that in today's climate is under constant threat of being severed for a more isolated, less communal way of living. Drinking alone is no fun and would suggest a problem, but coming together with others and letting down our guard has proved to be a lasting ritual that has never gone away. Perhaps we have not figured out a way to do this without alcohol, or perhaps there is something we have yet to realise about the benefits of this altered state. Or maybe we have forgotten it, and the ancient ancestral practices of sacredness have been misunderstood and obscured into something cheaper and less beneficial. But our thirst seems unquenched, and our glasses continue to be raised.